She thought it was just another routine business trip, a first-class seat, a billion-dollar deal waiting in New York, and a driver she barely noticed. But arrogance has a way of blinding even the smartest minds. When the CEO mocked the man behind the wheel, she couldn't have imagined that the very person she dismissed would soon hold the key to saving everything she'd built. In a single day, her pride would be shattered, her empire on the line, and one man's quiet brilliance would turn her world upside down. How did the driver she laughed at become her only hope? But first, please make sure to subscribe the channel and comment below from which city you are watching this video. Ava Reynolds was the kind of CEO headlines loved, sharp, fearless, and ruthlessly efficient. At just 40, she had built a tech empire from the ground up, commanding boardrooms filled with men twice her age. Her mornings began with private jets, her nights with champagne toasts over contracts worth more than most would see in a lifetime. To her, success wasn't a dream, it was the air she breathed. But beneath the polished surface, pride had settled deep within her, the kind that mistook status for worth. She'd grown used to being obeyed, praised, and feared, rarely challenged by anyone. So when a last-minute business trip required her to be driven across the city by a quiet, middle-aged man named Daniel, she barely looked up from her phone. His dark skin and worn uniform blended into the background of her busy life, just another service she paid for and forgot. Yet that ride would become the turning point she never saw coming. Because the deal waiting at her destination wasn't just another project. It was fragile, multilingual, and global, balanced on cultural nuances she couldn't yet see. And Daniel, the man she'd already dismissed, was about to play a role she could never have predicted. Something was about to test every assumption she'd ever made about intelligence, humility, and humanity itself. The city blazed in the golden haze of late afternoon as Ava's black sedan slipped through traffic toward the towering skyline. Inside, the world felt silent except for the soft hum of the engine and the steady clicking of her fingers on the tablet. She was rehearsing figures, projections, and promises, everything that would seal the billion-dollar deal waiting on the other side of the city. Daniel, her driver, remained wordless, his eyes steady on the road. To Ava, he was invisible, a background detail, like the passing cars or the rhythm of the wipers. But silence has a way of revealing things arrogance refuses to see. At the first checkpoint outside the global headquarters, the air grew tense. A group of foreign executives stood waiting to welcome her, speaking rapidly in a language she couldn't place. Ava straightened her blazer, confidence radiating like armor. She didn't notice the uneasy glance Daniel cast in the rearview mirror as she stepped out. The meeting began as triumphantly as she expected. Polite smiles, firm handshakes, and expensive coffee. But beneath those gestures, something felt off. The translator struggled. Misunderstandings rippled through every exchange. Words twisted in ways that changed meanings, and key phrases in contracts seemed to dissolve into confusion. What was meant to be agreement slowly turned into guarded hesitation. Ava, usually sharp, felt her control slipping. She grew frustrated, blaming the foreign partners for their poor communication. Her tone sharpened, her patience thinned. One executive, visibly offended, leaned back and whispered something in another language, something Ava couldn't understand, but instinctively knew wasn't flattering. She forced a smile, masking irritation with charm, but the tension only deepened. Meanwhile, outside in the hallway, Daniel waited by the car. Through the open doors, fragments of the conversation reached him, the confusion, the mistranslations, the nervous laughter. He recognized the languages instantly, Mandarin, Arabic, and a faint thread of Swahili in the assistant's side discussions. His mind began stitching them together, following the flow with quiet precision. Inside, the meeting was unraveling fast. Ava's billion-dollar dream was crumbling before her eyes. A critical clause had been misunderstood, and what she thought was a partnership now sounded like a withdrawal. Panic surged through her chest as her translator stammered helplessly. Her entire reputation, years of empire building, were slipping away in real time. As she tried to regain control, the door creaked open. Daniel stepped in, hesitant, almost apologetic. For a moment, everyone turned, startled by the intrusion of a driver into a multimillion-dollar boardroom. Ava's eyes widened with disbelief, her face burning with humiliation. But Daniel spoke softly, switching languages mid-sentence with effortless fluency. Mandarin flowed into Arabic, then into Swahili, bridging the gaps the professionals had fumbled. The room froze. One by one, the executive straightened, eyes locked on him. Confusion melted into recognition. Smiles returned. Within minutes, the tone of the meeting shifted. The very air seemed to lighten. Daniel translated each nuance perfectly, restoring trust where Ava's pride had built walls. She stood there, speechless, as her driver, rescued what she had nearly destroyed. The same man she had mocked in silence now spoke with grace, intellect, and authority. But even as relief swept through the room, Ava felt something heavier pressing against her chest. Shame. What else had she failed to see all along? And how could she ever face the man who just saved her from the downfall she had so arrogantly created? For a moment, Ava couldn't move. The boardroom felt frozen in time, a surreal stillness after chaos. Daniel stood at the center, his calm voice bridging cultures, his steady tone restoring what she had nearly destroyed. The foreign executives leaned in, nodding in respect, their earlier frustration now replaced with admiration. The billion-dollar deal, which had been seconds from collapse, was suddenly alive again. But as the final translation left Daniel's lips, all eyes turned to Ava. She forced a smile, but inside, her stomach twisted. Every gaze in the room had shifted, not to her, the CEO, but to the man she belittled without a second thought. He had done what she, with all her power, couldn't. After the meeting ended, applause broke out, not for her presentation, but for Daniel's brilliance. Executives approached him first, shaking his hand, thanking him in multiple languages. Cameras flashed and whispers spread. Ava stood in the corner, her pride dissolving under the weight of her own realization. The hierarchy she believed in, the one that placed her above others because of her title, her wealth, her color, crumbled in a single afternoon. When Daniel turned to leave, she caught his eyes. There was no triumph in them, no trace of resentment. Only quiet dignity, the kind that didn't need recognition to prove its worth. And that hurt more than any humiliation she had ever faced. As they left the building, reporters swarmed. One asked who had saved the deal. Without hesitation, the executives pointed to Daniel. The flash of cameras burned her face, not with fame, but with shame. That night, in the back seat of her car, the same seat she once sat in with arrogance, Ava watched the city lights blur through the tinted glass. The man she had dismissed as just a driver had reminded her of something she'd forgotten. Respect isn't earned through titles or money, but through humanity. And for the first time in years, she didn't feel powerful. She felt small. In the days that followed, the world took notice. News outlets ran headlines about the multilingual driver who saved $1 billion deal, but behind the headlines, something deeper had shifted. Ava couldn't escape the memory of that moment, the look in Daniel's eyes, the effortless brilliance she'd ignored, the quiet strength that shattered her illusions. She'd built her career on control and superiority, but that day taught her the one thing her wealth and power could never buy: humility. A week later, she called Daniel to her office. He arrived in the same crisp uniform, as calm and reserved as ever. There were no speeches or rehearsed apologies, just silence, heavy and sincere. She offered him a new position, one that recognized not just his skill, but his humanity. Daniel declined politely, explaining he preferred the peace of a road. His answer left her stunned, not because he refused the offer, but because it reminded her that true dignity doesn't seek validation from power. In time, Ava began changing how her company operated: diversity programs, mentorships, and community initiatives. But no policy could erase the guilt she carried, or the lesson burned into her heart. Racism isn't always loud. Sometimes, it hides behind smiles, titles, and silent assumptions. Every time she steps into a car now, she pauses, not out of habit, but respect. She greets every driver by name. Because she knows that brilliance doesn't always wear a suit, and wisdom doesn't always sit at the head of the table. And maybe that's the truth we all need to remember. How many lives, how many minds have we overlooked because we thought we already knew their worth? Sometimes the people we look down on are the very ones holding the key to our redemption.